Before we begin, I thought it would be fun if everyone lets me know in the comments where they're watching this video from. And while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe. Now, let's start today's episode. April Jones. A young girl stepped outside to play near her home and disappeared without a trace. Her sudden vanishing led to the largest search operation in the country's history, but despite all the efforts, she could not be found. For days, there were no answers. Then, investigators began uncovering a series of disturbing clues that eventually revealed the unsettling truth behind this dark and chilling case. April Jones was born on April 4, 2007 in the small British town of Meticulously. The town was peaceful and quiet, with a population of just over 2,000, situated far from any major cities. April was the youngest in her family, with an older brother and sister. She enjoyed spending time with friends, riding her beloved pink bike around the streets of her town, and swimming. When she turned 5 in 2012, April started primary school, where she quickly stood out as a bright, determined student who was adored by her teachers. April was also a social butterfly, quickly making friends with other kids. On October 1, 2012, she attended her swimming lesson at a local sports center while her parents went to a school meeting. Afterward, she invited a friend over, and her parents drove the girls home. The two watched a cartoon together, and around 7 p.m., April asked if she could go for a walk outside. Initially, her mom was hesitant because it was already starting to get dark, but April managed to convince her. Having done well in school the day before, her mom decided to allow it as a reward, though she reminded the girls not to wander too far from home. With that, April grabbed her bike and rode off. About 20 minutes later, her mom stepped outside to call her back, but April was nowhere to be found. Panic immediately set in. She began searching the nearby streets, hoping to catch a glimpse of her daughter. The neighborhood was on the outskirts of town, a small residential area with several apartment buildings. She walked around, checking behind the buildings, but there was no sign of April. Eventually, she spotted April's friend and hurried over to ask if she'd seen her. The friend's response sent chills through her. The girl explained that a car had pulled up next to them, and April had spoken to the driver before getting inside. The vehicle then drove away. Upon hearing this, April's mom was filled with dread and immediately called the police. Within minutes, officers arrived at their home and spoke to April's friend. She described the vehicle as a gray van and mentioned that the driver was a man with dark hair and a beard, wearing a green jacket and sweatpants. April's friend had gotten a clear look at the man because he actually stepped out of the van to help April climb inside. Her mother later explained that April had cerebral palsy, which made it difficult for her to get into a vehicle on her own. The friend also mentioned something that struck her as odd. She said April had entered the van from the driver's side. This immediately caught the police's attention because, in the UK, most cars have the steering wheel on the right side. The friend had simply assumed April was getting into the driver's seat, but in reality, she was likely entering the van from the passenger side. Realizing this meant April had most likely been abducted, the police quickly called for backup and declared the situation a critical incident. A massive search operation was launched, and investigators sent out an alert with details about the suspect and his van. News of April's disappearance spread quickly, first through the neighborhood and then far beyond. Dozens of people gathered outside her home, eager to assist with the search. However, the large crowd ended up complicating things for the police, who needed to go door to door, questioning each resident. Meanwhile, news of April's disappearance spread online, attracting even more volunteers to the area. By nightfall, hundreds of people had joined the search, walking the streets alongside law enforcement. The urgency of the situation was so great that even the local waste collection service stopped working, with every single worker leaving their job to help in the search for April. Before long, the case made national headlines. News outlets picked up the story, and the police issued a public appeal, asking anyone with information to come forward. They released April's photo and a description of the suspect, and soon tips began pouring in. Unfortunately, despite the massive effort, the search yielded no results. Within the first few hours, the entire town had been scoured, but there was still no sign of April. The next step was to search the surrounding forests and fields, but that proved to be more challenging than anticipated. By this time, it was completely dark, and rain had begun to fall. The terrain around the town was rugged and difficult to navigate, and officers knew they wouldn't be able to cover much ground overnight. Despite this, they remained determined to continue. The search went on until morning, and as the sun rose, even more volunteers showed up to help. Some had even traveled from neighboring towns to assist. Meanwhile, the police expanded their efforts by putting up missing persons alerts on billboards outside the city in hopes of generating any leads. As the case spread across the country, the police received a flood of calls, but most of the tips led nowhere. However, one name kept surfacing repeatedly: 46-year-old Mark Bridger, a local resident, who was mentioned by several callers. Mark Bridger quickly became a person of interest for several reasons. First, he fit the description of the suspect. Second, he was one of the few people in town who owned a left-hand drive vehicle, which was significant because April's friend had mentioned that she had gotten into the van from the driver's side, likely indicating it was a left-hand drive. But the biggest red flag came when witnesses reported seeing Bridger's car near April's neighborhood around the time she went missing. As detectives dug deeper into his background, they discovered that Mark Bridger had a criminal history, though it mostly involved minor to moderate offenses such as assaults, thefts, and driving without a license. The police intensified their search for him and identified a few possible addresses where he might be staying. Officers were dispatched to all of them simultaneously, but Bridger and his car were nowhere to be found. Just when it seemed like they had lost track of him, a breakthrough came. A police helicopter spotted Bridger walking his dog not far from his home. But what really stood out was his behavior. The helicopter had been circling for nearly half an hour, and he never looked up, not even once. A short while later, a police officer approached Bridger and asked him to identify himself. He gave his name and immediately added, "I know what this is about." The officer then asked the question everyone wanted an answer to: "Where is his April?" Bridger responded, "It was an accident. I hit her with my car." Right after that, he was placed under arrest and taken to the station. During the drive, he kept talking, despite the fact that the officer didn't ask any additional questions. He claimed he had no idea where April was because he had blacked out. According to him, after accidentally hitting her with his car, she was unresponsive. He panicked, put her in his vehicle, and tried to give her first aid, but nothing worked. Then he said everything just went blank for hours, and by the time he came to, April's body was gone. Bridger insisted that after realizing what had happened, he spent the entire night searching for her, wandering through the forests and fields. He also claimed that he only found out who April was that morning when he saw news reports about her disappearance on TV. Naturally, detectives weren't buying Bridger's story because there were too many inconsistencies. First, there was April's friend who had seen everything. She clearly remembered April talking to the driver and getting into the van with his help, fully conscious. But Bridger insisted he had hit her with his car and placed her inside while she was unconscious, so his version just didn't match the eyewitness account. Then there was the whole memory blackout claim. It sounded far-fetched on its own, but what made it even more suspicious was what police discovered next. Shortly after April disappeared, Bridger had shaved off his hair and beard. It looked like a clear attempt to alter his appearance and avoid being caught. Still, Bridger stuck to his story. When detectives pointed out the inconsistencies, he changed his tune slightly, now claiming he had been heavily drunk that day, which in theory could explain his supposed memory blackout. He also insisted that while he couldn't remember where he had put April's body, he was sure she was dead and in a safe place. No matter how hard investigators pressed him, they couldn't get the truth out of him. So they shifted their focus to his house. The moment they stepped inside, they were hit with the strong smell of cleaning products. The house was also uncomfortably hot. That's when they noticed the wood-burning stove in the living room. It had clearly been running for hours. Forensic teams collected the ashes and sent them for testing. But aside from that, there were no obvious clues. No sign of April, no belongings, nothing. However, when forensics took a closer look, they found traces of blood, and the lab results later confirmed it was April's. Next, investigators turned their attention to Bridger's car. If his story was true, that he had accidentally hit April with his vehicle, there should have been some evidence to back it up, but there wasn't. There was no blood inside the car, no damage to the exterior, nothing that suggested an accident had even happened. Once again, his version of events didn't add up. Then came the results from the ashes in his fireplace. Forensic experts found 17 fragments of human bone, all belonging to April. Another bone fragment was also discovered in the bathroom drain. This confirmed the heartbreaking reality. April was no longer alive. But detectives didn't believe Bridger had managed to completely destroy her remains. It was far more likely that he had taken what was left and hidden it somewhere. So despite the grim discovery, police pushed forward with their search, determined to find whatever was left. The news that April was most likely dead sent shockwaves through the community. Until that moment, people had held on to hope that she would be found alive. Now, the focus of the search had shifted. Hundreds of volunteers and police officers were no longer looking for a missing girl, but for her remains so her family could lay her to rest. By then, the search operation had grown into something massive. In fact, it would go down as the largest in the country's modern history. Alongside local volunteers, hundreds of professionals from various emergency services joined in. They searched through the most difficult terrains, rivers, forests, lakes, determined to find any trace of April. Meanwhile, detectives kept digging for evidence linking Bridger to the crime. When they examined his computer, they found something really disturbing. It was filled with illegal content involving minors. Even more sickening, he had saved photos of victims from other high-profile cases. On top of that, they found dozens of images of local children from their own town, including April and her older sister. It seemed like he had been downloading their pictures from social media. Then, few months before the abduction, Bridger had sent her a friend request on social media. She had mentioned it to their father, who immediately recognized the name. He had known Bridger back in the early 90s, but had lost touch with him over the years. The request struck him as odd. Why would Bridger, a grown man, want to connect with his teenage daughter? Trusting his instincts, he told her not to accept it. It's also worth mentioning that Bridger was a father himself. He had 6 children from 4 different women. Yet at the time of April's disappearance, he lived alone. Police discovered a troubling pattern. Bridger frequently pursued relationships with women who had young children. Given the horrific evidence found on his computer, this detail took on a whole new level of significance, and only made detectives more convinced they were dealing with a predator. As police dug deeper into Bridger's background, they discovered that he never stuck to one job for long, constantly jumping between different fields of work. He also had a habit of making up stories about himself. To some people, he claimed he had served in the military and even had to change his identity for security reasons, but that was a complete lie. What made it even stranger was that he repeated this claim during police interrogations. He insisted that he had served his country, that he was a good person, and that he would never have done something like this on purpose. Between that and his strange claims about April's death, detectives started to realize they were probably dealing with a pathological liar. It didn't matter how many times his stories were proven false, he just kept sticking to them. They also learned something else supporting this theory. Bridger had told everyone he knew that his parents were dead, but in reality, they were very much alive. Another interesting detail was that Bridger had broken up with his girlfriend just days before April's abduction. People who knew him said he didn't take it well at all. He started drinking heavily, and it only sent him further downhill. As police continued combing through his computer, they found something even more disturbing. Just hours before April disappeared, Bridger had messaged 3 different women asking to meet up, but all of them turned him down. After that, he opened and watched some illegal content from his sickening collection. At this point, his guilt seemed undeniable, but there was still one major problem. April's remains were nowhere to be found. Desperate for answers, detectives repeatedly turned to the public, hoping that someone had seen Bridger or his vehicle that night. Any small lead could help them retrace his steps and finally figure out what he had done with Abel's body. At some point, a witness came forward with an interesting lead. He reported seeing Bridger the morning after Abel's abduction, around 9 a.m. The man was walking along the riverbank carrying a black bag. Investigators also discovered that shortly after that, Bridger had taken his car to a repair shop. The mechanics remembered him well because he had been acting strangely. By that time, everyone in town knew about April's disappearance, and emotions were running high. But Bridger talked about the case as if he were a grieving parent. He was on the verge of tears, speaking as though the missing child was his own. His reaction stood out to the workers. It was overly emotional, almost theatrical, and something about it just didn't sit right. Following this new lead, search teams focused their efforts along the river, hoping to find any trace of April. But no matter how thoroughly they combed the area, they still found nothing. Realizing that April's body might never be recovered, detectives made a difficult decision. They charged Bridger with murder, relying on the overwhelming evidence they already had. With April's blood found inside Bridger's home, police pieced together what they believed had happened. Their theory was that Bridger lured April into his car under some pretense, then took her back to his house, committed SA, and killed her. After that, he started disposing of her body. Investigators learned that Bridger had previously worked at a slaughterhouse. They suspected he might have used those skills to get rid of the body before burning parts of her remains in his fireplace. But forensic experts agreed there was no way he had gotten rid of everything, which meant some of it had to be hidden somewhere else. With the case moving forward, Bridger was placed in jail to await trial, which was set to begin in a few months. Meanwhile, search teams weren't planning to give up. Even as the weather got worse and new leads dried up, they kept searching, still hoping to find April's remains. The prosecution was confident they could secure a conviction even without a body, but they still refused to give up the search. In total, search teams scoured 60 square kilometers or 37 square miles of land, covering every possible location where April's remains could have been hidden, but they found nothing. In the end, April's parents had no choice but to bury only the small fragments recovered from Bridger's home. To honor her memory, they also placed some of her belongings inside the coffin. Hundreds of people attended her funeral, many traveling from other towns just to say goodbye. Over the course of the search, April had become like family to an entire community, and now they had to let her go. In January 2013, 3 months after April's murder, Bridger stood before the judge and pleaded not guilty to murder. But at the same time, he admitted that he was likely responsible for her death. During the trial, he stuck to his story, claiming that he had accidentally run over April with his car, despite overwhelming evidence proving otherwise. He also insisted that he still couldn't remember where he had hidden her remains. And yet, Bridger continued to paint himself as the good guy, saying he had only wanted to help April after the so-called accident. The trial lasted until late May, and in the end, the jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, which is a pretty rare sentence in the UK. After the trial, Bridger was transferred to a new prison, where he was attacked by another inmate. He stabbed him several times with a shank, but the injuries weren't fatal. For years after his conviction, detectives kept reaching out to Bridger, hoping he'd finally tell them where April's remains were, but he never wavered. He just kept insisting he remembered nothing. Then, out of nowhere, police got a tip from another inmate. According to him, Bridger had confessed, saying he had dumped April's remains in the river near his home. But investigators weren't convinced. If a bag containing human remains had been thrown into the water, it likely would have surfaced. And given that search teams had thoroughly scanned the river for miles, it seemed highly unlikely that Bridger was telling the truth. A year after his sentencing, the local government bought Bridger's house, and in November 2014, they decided to demolish it. Hundreds of locals, including April's parents, gathered to watch as the house was torn down, the very place where she had been taken from them. In 2018, April's family endured another devastating chapter. Her father became seriously ill, which led to partial memory loss. When he regained consciousness, he asked his wife why April hadn't visited him in the hospital. Tragically, this meant she had to break the heart-wrenching news to him once more, informing him that their daughter was gone. In an unbearable twist, he was forced to relive the agony of losing April all over again. As for the search for April's remains, it has remained stalled since 2013. While the police have stated they are prepared to resume the search if new information surfaces, no significant progress has been made. More than 12 years have passed since April was abducted, and detectives have admitted that the chances of ever finding her are slim to none. Moving on to the next case. Destiny Renee Pitman. Destiny was born on January 9, 1992, in Kokomo, Indiana, to Melvin Douglas and Carla Pitman McCombs. She was one of 5 siblings, with 2 brothers and 2 sisters. By February 2013, at the age of 21, Destiny was living at 815 James Drive in Kokomo with her 2 young children, her boyfriend, a female roommate, and 3 dogs. On the evening of February 7, 2013, 2 armed individuals forced their way into the home. Destiny came out of her bedroom into a hallway to confront them and was fatally shot by one of the intruders. The bullet passed through her chest and lodged in a wall at the end of the hallway. Although her boyfriend, roommate, children, and pets were all present during the attack, they hid out of fear and were not harmed. At around 9:33 p.m., Kokomo Police Department officers responded to reports of gunfire at the residence. When they arrived at the scene, Destiny had already succumbed to her injuries, and there was nothing they could do to save her. A single .40 caliber shell casing was found at the scene. Neither Destiny's boyfriend, whose name was never made public, nor the roommates saw the intruders, leaving investigators without any descriptions to work from. Authorities suspected that the attack may have been a robbery attempt, targeting Destiny and her boyfriend for marijuana and cash linked to their involvement in drug sales. The boyfriend reportedly told police that he had sold marijuana and, just days before the home invasion, had taken a bag containing weed and over $2,000 in cash to another residence. Both he and the roommate also told investigators that Destiny had been involved in selling as well, though she had done so less frequently after coming into an inheritance. Despite the leads, investigators were unable to identify those responsible, and the case eventually went cold. For over a decade, Destiny's murder remained unsolved, with no suspects ever named. Her death left a lasting impact on her loved ones. Even years later, her mother remained heartbroken, often in tears. "I hope and pray to God someone will come forward," she said. "My life has turned absolutely upside down. They took my child for no reason. Whoever it was, I hope they are satisfied. They did not get anything out of it. She was just getting ready to start modeling and have a life for herself." Her mother said, not knowing who did this to her daughter or why eats at her each and every day. On March 2, 2023, 2 men were finally identified as suspects in Destiny Pitman's case. Investigators announced the arrest of 32-year-old Joey McCartney and 36-year-old Jesse McCartney. Joey McCartney was taken into custody by U.S. Marshals at the crack of dawn at a residence in Graham, Kentucky. Jesse McCartney was arrested by U.S. Marshals and local police roughly 2 hours later at a residence in Kokomo. Graham and Kokomo are more than a 4-hour drive apart. As a result of the continued investigations since February 2013, along with citizens continuing to provide leads, investigators with the Criminal Investigations Section were able to determine that these 2 individuals were responsible for what happened to Destiny. On December 5, 2022, a woman called in and claimed to have information about Destiny's case. She told police she could not keep this information to herself anymore after repeatedly seeing press releases on the case over the years. According to the court documents, this informant claimed to have been with Jesse McCartney on the night Destiny's life was ended and had been sitting in his white Jeep Cherokee outside Destiny's home. According to the informant, Jesse and Joey said they were running an errand, which the individual reportedly believed meant a deal that involved illegal substances. Jesse reportedly told the informant to stay inside the vehicle while he proceeded to put on black leather gloves and grabbed his handgun. Joey McCartney met Jesse at Destiny's front door before the pair entered the residence. The two of them then started searching the home, which police believe it was for substances that Destiny and her boyfriend were selling. The informant heard a gunshot, and so both men come running out of the house. Jesse was sweating heavily and had a large bag of marijuana and cash in his hand, according to the informant. She alleges that she and Jesse drove back to his apartment, and Joey joined them. She said Jesse then made her drive back by the home the next day. When they drove past, there was police tape surrounding the house. The informant also told police about Jesse McCartney changing his phone number and said he still lived in Kokomo on Monroe Street. She told investigators that 6 months after the incident, he sold both his gun and his Jeep. The woman explained that she hadn't come forward earlier because she was afraid, and still is. She also reportedly had a past connection with Jesse. After receiving this new information, Lee showed Destiny's boyfriend photos of Joey and Jesse McCartney. The boyfriend said Joey looked familiar and might have been to the house before with a mutual friend, but investigators were still unsure whether Destiny personally knew either of the McCartneys. Both men were eventually charged, and their hearings were scheduled for March 2023. Jesse McCartney's trial was held on August 11, 2023, where he was acquitted of some of the charges after it was determined he wasn't the one who shot Destiny. Joey McCartney's trial has yet to occur. Moving on to the next case. Kelsey Barrett. A young mother disappeared under mysterious circumstances after returning home from a trip to the grocery store. At first, police believed the case would be straightforward, but what they eventually uncovered shocked even the most experienced investigators, revealing twists no one could have anticipated. Kelsey Barrett was born on September 15, 1989, in Moses Lake, Washington. She was raised on a farm alongside her parents and older brother, taking on a variety of chores from a young age. Although she enjoyed life on the farm, Kelsey was especially captivated by crop dusting planes, the small aircraft used to spray crops or spread seeds. Determined to fly one herself, she enrolled in a local college to pursue her dream as soon as she graduated from high school. After earning her pilot's license, she worked as a flight instructor while continuing to help her family on the farm. Life was full and fulfilling, but Kelsey longed to start a family of her own. In 2016, at age 27, she finally got the opportunity to make that dream a reality. Kelsey met a man named Patrick through an online platform, and they connected instantly. Like her, Patrick was a farmer and shared her dream of having a large family. After several months of getting to know each other, Kelsey made the decision to move to Colorado to be with him, and not long after, the two became engaged. Soon after relocating, Kelsey secured a position as a flight instructor at a respected aviation school known for training military pilots. It was an excellent career move, but it came with one major drawback. The school was located about 70 miles from Patrick's farm. To manage the commute, Kelsey rented a home in Woodland Park, a town closer to her job but still within a reasonable distance of Patrick's place. Although living separately wasn't ideal, they made the most of their time together, and their relationship progressed quickly. In early 2017, Kelsey learned she was expecting, and not long after, the couple welcomed a baby girl. It looked like Kelsey's dream of starting a family was finally becoming reality. However, not long after their daughter was born, her relationship with Patrick began to unravel. She noticed him becoming increasingly distant, emotionally withdrawing, showing less interest in their partnership, and seeming disengaged from the life they were building together. Despite the shift, Kelsey wasn't ready to give up. She remained committed and did everything she could to mend the relationship. On the morning of November 22nd, which was Thanksgiving Day, Kelsey had plans to cook a holiday meal. She called her mother that morning to chat and mentioned she was heading to the grocery store to pick up some last-minute ingredients. In the days that followed, she sent a few text messages to her mom, but then, without warning, she stopped replying. At first, her mother assumed Kelsey was simply preoccupied. After all, she had a demanding job and a 1-year-old daughter to look after. As the days went by and Kelsey continued to ignore calls and messages, her mother's concern turned into alarm. Nearly a week had passed with no communication, which was completely unlike Kelsey. Hoping for some clarity, her mother contacted Kelsey's older brother, but he, too, hadn't heard from her. Growing desperate, she reached out to Patrick, thinking he might have some answers, but what he said only deepened the mystery. Patrick claimed that he and Kelsey had broken up, supposedly on Thanksgiving Day, over a week earlier. According to him, Kelsey had told him beforehand that she needed some space and wanted to end their relationship. He said that on Thanksgiving, she dropped off their daughter with him, gathered a few of her belongings from his home, and then disappeared. He insisted he hadn't heard from her since. Kelsey's mother, however, didn't buy his explanation. She couldn't imagine her daughter walking away from her 1-year-old child without checking in, not even once. What troubled Kelsey's mother even more was that she had spoken to her daughter on the very day Patrick claimed the breakup happened. During that conversation, Kelsey never mentioned ending the relationship. In fact, she sounded upbeat and was excited about preparing Thanksgiving dinner. Sensing that something was off, her mother asked Patrick if he could go check on Kelsey at her home. Patrick agreed but said he needed to finish some work on the farm first. However, he never followed up or called back. That silence was the final red flag for Kelsey's mother. Realizing that something might be seriously wrong, she decided to report her daughter missing. She contacted the police and explained everything she knew. In response, local officers were dispatched to perform a welfare check at Kelsey's home. When they arrived, her car was parked outside, but there was no sign of Kelsey. No one answered the door, and without a warrant, the police were unable to enter the residence. All they could report back was that she wasn't there. Officers did speak with Patrick during the initial investigation, but he repeated the same story, that Kelsey had left him, saying she needed time and space. This time, Patrick added a new piece of information to his story. He claimed that Kelsey had taken some of her belongings from his house, including her handgun. He also said she had been acting strangely in the days leading up to her disappearance, and suggested he was worried she may have done something drastic. Police requested access to Kelsey's home, and what they found inside only deepened the mystery. Nearly all of her personal belongings were still there: clothing, important documents, and other essentials she would have needed if she had left voluntarily. But one item was missing: her car keys. Her vehicle was still parked outside, yet the keys were nowhere to be found. It was difficult to understand how or why she would take her keys but not her car. At that point, the local police decided to officially open a missing persons investigation. One of their first moves was to analyze data from Kelsey's phone. When they reviewed the GPS records, they discovered that the last known ping from her device occurred on November 25th, 3 days after she was last seen. Even more puzzling, the signal came from Gooding, a small town located in Idaho, roughly 800 miles away from Kelsey's home in Colorado. That didn't make sense. When police spoke with Kelsey's family, they confirmed that she had no friends, relatives, or any known connections in Gooding. No one could understand why she would have traveled to such a remote town. Detectives contacted law enforcement in Gooding for assistance, but their search came up empty. In a small town like Gooding, any unfamiliar face would have stood out, yet there were no signs that Kelsey had ever been there. This raised even more questions, and investigators realized they needed to explore other avenues for answers. They reviewed CCTV footage from the grocery store Kelsey had visited on Thanksgiving Day. The video showed her behaving completely normally. There was nothing about her actions that seemed out of the ordinary. She wasn't in a rush, didn't appear upset, and didn't seem like someone who was planning to vanish without a trace. She picked up groceries for dinner, and even bought a flower before leaving the store. Police conducted another search of Kelsey's home, but once again, they found no clues. Days passed without any breakthroughs, and in that time, Kelsey's mother and brother flew to Colorado to help with the search. They stayed at her house, and right away, her mother had an unsettling feeling. Something just didn't seem right. But she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. Then one day, Kelsey's older brother went to use the bathroom and happened to notice something red on the inside of the toilet. It caught his attention, and when he looked closer, he realized it could be blood. He immediately reported it to the police, and tests confirmed his suspicion. It was human blood. But this discovery was just the beginning. Investigators had already searched the house once, but their examination had been fairly basic. This time, forensics decided to use luminol, a chemical that reveals traces of blood even if it has been wiped away or cleaned to the point of being invisible to the human eye. They started spraying luminol in the bathroom, and what they saw was truly chilling. There was blood everywhere. It had been cleaned, but under the chemical reaction, it lit up across the walls and floor. The same thing happened in the living room. There were large stains of wiped away blood, revealing a gruesome scene that had been carefully scrubbed from sight. Samples were sent to the lab, and the results confirmed what investigators feared most: the blood belonged to Kelsey. But there was something else. Among the samples, forensic experts discovered 2 additional DNA profiles, one belonging to a man, the other to a woman. At this point, detectives were almost certain Kelsey was no longer alive. Their focus now shifted to identifying the 2 unknown individuals whose DNA had been found in her home. Naturally, Patrick became the prime suspect. Investigators had already found his version of events suspicious. But now that they were almost certain Kelsey was dead, their doubts about him only grew stronger. When they got access to Patrick's phone, they saw that he had been calling and texting Kelsey up until November 25th, the day she stopped responding to everyone else. Their messages mostly revolved around their breakup, but there was nothing particularly useful in the exchange. However, detectives were already leaning toward a different timeline. They believed Kelsey had actually been killed on Thanksgiving, November 22nd. The problem was that aside from those text messages, there was no real evidence that she had been alive for the next 3 days. That raised a terrifying possibility. Kelsey might have been murdered shortly after returning home from the grocery store. And if that was the case, someone else had been using her phone to send those messages. That's when detectives noticed something interesting. Patrick had repeatedly called a phone number with a Gooding area code, both before and after Kelsey disappeared. Wanting to know more, they traced the number and found that it belonged to a woman named Crystal. Investigators called her and asked how she knew Patrick. Crystal explained that they were essentially business partners. They co-owned several horses. When asked when she had last seen him, she initially claimed she couldn't remember. But after some hesitation, she admitted that they were supposed to meet right after Thanksgiving. According to her, she and Patrick had planned to buy another horse, so she drove to Colorado to see it herself. However, along the way, she found out that Patrick didn't have enough money for the purchase, so she turned around and went back home. Considering that the drive from her town to Patrick's was almost 1,000 miles, detectives found Crystal's story suspicious. It seemed unlikely that someone would embark on such a long road trip just to see a new horse. Adding to their doubts, Crystal claimed she hadn't even used her own car for the trip. Instead, she had borrowed a friend's vehicle because it was more fuel efficient. That detail felt oddly specific, almost as if she was trying to justify why her car wouldn't show up on any traffic cameras or toll records. Before ending the conversation, detectives asked Crystal if she knew Kelsey. She responded that she had heard about her on the news but had never met her in person. That statement immediately raised red flags. Crystal lived in another state, and at that point, Kelsey's disappearance hadn't yet made national headlines. So how would she have already heard about it? After wrapping up their call with Crystal, investigators decided to dig deeper into her background. They discovered that she had recently gone through a divorce, so they reached out to her ex-husband, hoping he could provide more insight. When detectives asked Crystal's ex-husband if he knew Patrick, his response completely contradicted what Crystal had told them. He revealed that she and Patrick had known each other since February 2006. Patrick was actually her first love. Over the years, they had an on and off relationship but had always stayed in touch. Even more suspicious, her ex-husband claimed that their affair had never truly ended, not even after he and Crystal got married. According to him, she was still seeing Patrick in 2017, the same year he got engaged to Kelsey. But that wasn't all. Crystal had also lied to her ex-husband about her whereabouts after Thanksgiving. At first, she told him she had gone to visit friends from November. But after the police contacted her, she finally admitted to him that she had actually been in Colorado. Then came another suspicious detail. On December 4th, Crystal asked her ex-husband to go with her to buy a new phone, claiming she had lost hers. Detectives immediately took note of the timing. December 4th was the exact same day they had obtained Patrick's phone for investigation. With all this information, investigators had enough evidence to obtain a warrant for Crystal's DNA sample. They flew to Idaho to collect it, and while Crystal complied with the request, she flat out refused to answer any of their questions. As they waited for the lab results, detectives reached out to the friend who had lent Crystal her car for the trip to Colorado. She allowed them to inspect the vehicle and mentioned that she kept a handgun inside. When investigators checked the gun, they noticed something alarming. One bullet was missing from the magazine. The friend was adamant that the gun had been fully loaded when she lent Crystal the car, and she had no idea where the missing bullet had gone. But this was just the tip of the iceberg. Investigators then spoke with another one of Crystal's friends, a woman named Michelle, and what she told them completely turned the case on its head. Michelle revealed that Crystal had called her in late October, about a month before Kelsey disappeared, and told her something shocking. Through tears, Crystal confided that Patrick had asked her to kill his fiancée. According to Michelle, Patrick told Crystal that Kelsey was mistreating their daughter. He insisted that he couldn't do it himself because it would be too obvious, and he needed someone else to carry out the murder. During the conversation, Michelle urged Crystal to go to the police, but she never did. This revelation completely changed the course of the investigation. Police were now almost certain that both Patrick and Crystal were somehow involved in Kelsey's murder. But despite the mounting evidence, they still had no DNA results, and more importantly, no concrete proof of what had actually happened to Kelsey. As investigators continued searching for more evidence, the case took another unexpected turn. Crystal called them and said that she had hired a lawyer and was ready to talk. When detectives met with her, she didn't hesitate and dropped a bombshell. Crystal admitted that Patrick had killed Kelsey and confessed to cleaning up the crime scene afterward. According to Crystal, Patrick had been planning Kelsey's murder for months. But from the very beginning, he had intended for Crystal to be the one to carry it out. Just as she had told her friend Michelle, Patrick repeatedly insisted that Kelsey was abusing their daughter, using drugs, and drinking excessively. He convinced Crystal that getting rid of her was the only option. Crystal agreed to help Patrick, and 2 months before Kelsey's disappearance, they came up with their first plan. The idea was simple. Crystal would poison Kelsey's favorite coffee with some medication. Since Crystal was a nurse, she had easy access to the necessary drugs. But there was one big problem. Crystal and Kelsey had never met. To get around this, she and Patrick came up with a cover story. Crystal would pretend to be a new neighbor who had just moved to the area and was introducing herself to the locals. In September, she put their plan into motion. She grabbed Kelsey's favorite coffee, but Crystal actually couldn't go through with it. She hadn't poisoned the coffee. She just wanted to see Kelsey in person. And just like that, their first attempt failed. Patrick's next plan was more direct. Crystal was supposed to drive to his farm, pick up a metal pipe he had prepared, go to Kelsey's house, and kill her. She drove nearly 1,000 miles, picked up the pipe, and even pulled up outside Kelsey's house. But once again, she couldn't go through with it. She sat there for a while, then drove off without ever stepping out of the car. But Patrick didn't give up. His third plan was almost identical to the last one. But this time, instead of a pipe, he left a baseball bat for Crystal to use. Once again, she took the long drive, picked up the weapon, and approached Kelsey's house. And once again, she couldn't go through with it. At that point, Patrick realized if he wanted Kelsey dead, he would have to do it himself. According to Crystal, it all happened in the afternoon on Thanksgiving Day. Patrick showed up at Kelsey's house with a twisted plan. He told her he had bought several holiday-scented candles and suggested they play a game. She would be blindfolded and try to guess the different scents. Kelsey went along with it, completely unaware of what was about to happen. As soon as Patrick tied the blindfold over her eyes, he grabbed the baseball bat and carried out the murder. What made it even more horrifying was that their 1-year-old daughter was in the next room the entire time. After killing Kelsey, Patrick placed her body in a large plastic container and loaded it into the trunk of his car. Then, as if nothing had happened, he took his daughter and drove to his family's Thanksgiving dinner. While his relatives gathered around the table, laughing and celebrating, Kelsey's body sat just a few yards away, hidden inside his vehicle. After dinner, Patrick drove out to a small town called Cripple Creek, where he had rented a barn and left Kelsey's body there for several days. That same night, he called Crystal and told her she needed to come and clean up the mess he had made. She immediately understood. Kelsey was dead. Trying to cover her tracks, Crystal borrowed her friend's car, thinking it might help throw off investigators if the police ever looked into it. She then gathered a stash of cleaning supplies and set off for Colorado. While she was on the road, Patrick called her again. This time, he had a specific request. He warned her to be extra careful because he couldn't find one of Kelsey's teeth. He didn't want it turning up somewhere it shouldn't, especially not in front of Kelsey's family. When Crystal stepped into Kelsey's home, she was met with a horrifying scene. There was blood everywhere. It covered the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. She spent over 4 hours scrubbing the place, but some stains were impossible to remove, even with heavy-duty cleaning chemicals. So she gathered anything that had blood on it, rags, towels, and other items, stuffed them into garbage bags and loaded them into her car. After finishing the cleanup, she casually stopped at a cafe for something to eat before heading to meet Patrick. They stopped at a gas station where Patrick filled up a canister with gasoline. Then, they drove to the barn, retrieved Kelsey's body and took it back to Patrick's farm. There, they built a fire and burned her remains. As they stood by the flames, Patrick's mother stepped outside. She watched them for a while, but whether she realized what was really happening remains unknown. Before Crystal left for home, Patrick handed her Kelsey's phone. For the next few days, she responded to texts from Kelsey's family and friends, trying to keep up the illusion that Kelsey was still alive. But eventually, she got rid of the phone, destroying the last trace of Kelsey's connection to the outside world. Despite helping Patrick cover up a brutal murder, Crystal insisted that she hadn't acted of her own free will. She claimed she had been terrified of becoming his next victim, and only did what he asked out of fear for her life and for her children's lives. She said Patrick had threatened to harm them if she didn't cooperate. Before ending her confession, Crystal added that she had actually tried to help police catch Patrick. She claimed that she had deliberately left a few bloodstains in Kelsey's home, hoping investigators would find them. The detectives were highly skeptical of this claim. Crystal had countless opportunities to go to the police and prevent the murder. Instead, she not only allowed Patrick to go through with it, but had been willing to kill Kelsey herself 3 separate times. And even after Patrick carried out the murder, she didn't come forward. She helped him clean up the crime scenes, dispose of the body, and mislead Kelsey's family and friends. In the end, her confession wasn't motivated by guilt or a sense of justice. The truth was, her lawyer had advised her to take a plea deal, one that would drop all charges against her except for a single count of evidence tampering related to destroying Kelsey's phone. Despite Crystal's detailed confession, police still needed solid physical evidence to take the case to trial. They had already searched Patrick's farm once and found nothing incriminating. But this time, with Crystal's help, they returned to the property, and she pointed out the exact spot where they had burned Kelsey's remains. Had done a thorough job of covering it up, so investigators had to dig through layers of dirt and ash. Eventually, forensic experts uncovered traces of a burned body. However, there was almost nothing left that could be used for DNA analysis. The only piece of evidence was the tooth Crystal had found while cleaning up the crime scene. But even that was so badly damaged by fire, investigators couldn't conclusively prove it belonged to Kelsey. Still, there was one crucial breakthrough. By this time, the lab results from the DNA samples found in Kelsey's home had come in. The results confirmed what detectives already suspected. The 2 unidentified profiles belonged to Patrick and Crystal. That was the final piece of evidence they needed. Patrick was eventually arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He spent the next years behind bars while prosecutors built their case against him, refusing to admit any guilt. According to the prosecution, Patrick had multiple motives for wanting Kelsey dead. First, their relationship was falling apart, and he wanted nothing more to do with her. But since they had a child together, simply walking away wasn't an option, so he decided to get rid of her permanently. The second motive was financial. Patrick was struggling with some serious money problems and was at risk of losing part of his farming business. Investigators believe this could have also played a role in his decision to kill Kelsey. Even though prosecutors couldn't pinpoint a single clear-cut motive, by the time of the trial, investigators had gathered undeniable proof of Patrick's guilt. One of the biggest pieces of evidence came from his phone records. Data from his smartphone showed that he had spent several hours at Kelsey's home on the day of her murder. This directly contradicted his claim that he had only stopped by for a few minutes to pick up their daughter and drop off some of her belongings. CCTV footage from a neighbor's house further discredited his story. The video showed Patrick arriving at Kelsey's home with their daughter. But instead of leaving shortly after, as he claimed, he didn't come back outside for several hours. Then came another damning detail. After leaving Kelsey's home, Patrick's phone traveled to his farm, but Kelsey's phone moved with him. He hadn't even bothered to turn it off. For the next few days, Kelsey's phone remained near Patrick's, tracking alongside his movements, until he finally handed it off to Crystal, who had used it to send misleading texts before destroying it. On top of all this, detectives uncovered a wealth of surveillance footage linking Patrick to the crime. One camera captured him driving with the large plastic container, the same one he later used to hide Kelsey's body. Another camera at the gas station recorded him and Crystal filling up a gas canister, further confirming their involvement in destroying the remains. Then, during the trial, another disturbing detail came to life. An employee at a mobile carrier store testified that Patrick had visited on the same day police seized his phone and asked a very suspicious question. He inquired about how to remotely wipe all the data from a device. However, the most incriminating testimony came from someone in the jail. One of Patrick's cellmates revealed that while awaiting trial, Patrick had created a hit list with 3 names on it: Crystal, her ex-husband, and Kelsey's mother. He wanted them dead. This testimony solidified the case against Patrick, proving he was not only guilty but still dangerous. With the overwhelming evidence in Crystal's testimony, the jury found Patrick guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, along with an additional 156 years. As for Crystal, her plea deal resulted in a surprisingly lenient sentence of just 3 years in prison, though a judge later reduced it to 18 months, with the possibility of early release after just 1 year. In the end, she served very little time, despite the fact that she could have stopped the crime but instead helped cover it up. On a brighter note, Kelsey's family was granted full custody of her daughter, who has lived with them ever since. To honor Kelsey's love for flying, her parents also started a nonprofit to support aspiring pilots, ensuring that Kelsey's legacy endures. Moving on to the next case. Ludlow John and Jane Doe. In November 1980, an archaeologist working in a remote area of the Mojave Desert uncovered the remains of a man and a woman. Both had been murdered and buried in a shallow grave several miles east of Ludlow, California. The victims were found without clothing or identification. An autopsy later confirmed that they had died from a combination of gunshot wounds and blunt force trauma. The coroner estimated that they had been killed and buried between 6 to 8 months before their discovery. The victims were believed to be in their 20s at the time of their deaths. Despite years of effort, law enforcement was unable to determine their identities. However, investigators did manage to identify a possible suspect. Howard Neal, a former Ludlow resident, had left the town shortly after the murders. He was later charged in Mississippi for the 1981 killings of his brother, his 13-year-old niece, and her 12-year-old friend. In February 1982, Howard was sentenced to death for the murders. However, 8 years later, His sentence was overturned and reduced to a triple life sentence after an IQ test revealed that he was borderline mentally disabled. Over the years, law enforcement attempted to interview Howard multiple times, but his attorney consistently denied their requests. Privately, however, the attorney hinted to police that they did not need to search for another suspect in the Lello murders. In 2017, investigators were finally able to question Howard. During the interview, Howard admitted to committing the Lello murders. He explained that the two victims had been hitchhiking along Highway 66 when he picked them up. He brought them back to his home, where he attempted to sleep with the female victim. This led to a confrontation between Howard and the male victim, ending with Howard shooting and killing him. He then sexually assaulted the female, and killed her as well. He then buried their bodies in a shallow grave in an isolated area off of Highway 66. Howard, however, did not know much about the victims. He did mention that the female may have been from Arkansas and may have had a daughter that she had left behind to travel across the country. He could not provide any information about the male other than he looked like a quote hippie. In 2018, Christine Marie Sally, who lived in Virginia, hired a private investigator to find her biological parents. The private investigator submitted her DNA to the GED Match database. In December of 2020, her DNA finally matched with the DNA of the female victim, which had been submitted by the police a few years prior. The match indicated that the victim was most likely the mother of Christine Marie Sally. Christine told the investigators that the adoption papers obtained by the private investigators had her biological mother's name, Pamela Diane Duffy. The investigators then submitted another sample of Christine's DNA along with the female victim's DNA to the California Department of Justice, who confirmed that the female victim was indeed Christine's mother. The female victim was finally identified as Pamela Diane Duffy. Christine told investigators that she learned before that her mother had gone missing. She recalls that her mother had been associated with a man known as Diggers Lane. She also told the investigators that the man had served time in a Virginia prison. Her mother had planned to travel across the country with him after his release from prison in 1979. However, when investigators searched the database, they found no records of a man named Diggers Lane. With assistance from the Virginia State Police, they narrowed down their search to one individual who fit the description, William Everett Lane. However, there was no evidence that he had ever gone by the name Digger. His arrest records included a home address, which led police to several of his relatives. William's mother provided a DNA sample, and in April 2021, the male victim was officially identified as William Everett Lane. After 42 years, both victims were finally given their true identities, bringing closure to the case. Moving on to the next case. Michelle Norris. On May 26, 1988, 7-year-old Michelle Norris went to the playground of Captain G. Harold Hunt Elementary School in Central Falls, Rhode Island. She was in first grade and wanted to play with her brothers. Her mother, Julia, stayed behind to rest due to a kidney infection. After her parents' separation, Michelle and her siblings were staying with their mother at their grandmother's house. One of the windows of the home overlooked the playground. Before leaving, Michelle asked her mother if she needed any Tylenol, but Julia declined. Michelle told her mother she loved her, said goodbye, and left. That was the last time Julia saw her daughter. At the playground, Michelle's brothers did not notice anything unusual. Julia believed her daughter would not have gone with a stranger without a fight, and suspected that whoever took Michelle was someone she knew. Michelle was last seen between 6 and 7 p.m. that evening. A search party was quickly organized, but it wasn't until a few days later that volunteers found Michelle's body. She was deceased and unclothed, less than half a mile from the playground, on the side of a hill behind the dance hall on Brook Street. Her pink t-shirt and purple shorts were neatly folded next to her body. The area had been searched just a day prior by her father, William. Medical examiner Kristen Sweeney performed the autopsy and discovered that Michelle's end was violent. She'd been beaten and sexually assaulted before being forced into the soil and suffocated. Her body sported numerous cuts and bruises which she had sustained from trying to fight off her abuser. Forensic testing, however, found that the soil Michelle had inhaled did not match that of the dump site, suggesting that she had been slain elsewhere. This vile attack on a little girl sent shock waves throughout the city. Parents held their children tighter and became wary of letting them out of their sights. Although several people were questioned during the initial investigation into Michelle's demise, leads were quick to dry up. Several years later, the police chief of Central Falls at the time told a reporter with Providence Journal that he believed a local resident was responsible for the abduction and homicide. This unnamed suspect has never been taken into custody, however, due to a lack of evidence. It has baffled investigators and online sleuths alike that Michelle did not scream or run away, adding credence to the thought that she must have known whoever took her. However, it still seems unusual. There were no witnesses to the crime or its aftermath. Did the abductor live nearby? How did they get away from the playground with Michelle? There are so many questions and so few answers. There is one publicly known suspect in the case. He is possibly the one who investigators are interested in. According to the investigation Discovery show, Breaking Homicide, Michelle's best friend's stepdad faced criminal charges for molesting his stepdaughter. It was reported that the man who might have been involved in Michelle's abduction lived just a few blocks from the playground. However, he has never been charged in connection with her disappearance or death. Similar to the case of Lila, Michelle's murder has been featured on playing cards distributed to prisoners, in hopes that it might lead to a breakthrough in the investigation. Michelle's mother, Julia, now lives in Massachusetts and has 7 grandchildren. Following Michelle's death, a memorial reward was established in her honor by the Children's Friend and Service Agency in Rhode Island. The Michelle Norris Memorial Award is given annually to an individual or organization that makes exceptional contributions toward improving the futures of the state's most vulnerable children. Unfortunately, Michelle's case has remained largely unsolved in recent years. If you have any information about her case, you can contact the Rhode Island State Police at 401-444-1046. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.